What's on the menu at state dinners where presidents welcome the history's most powerful figures? Which leader hosted the most unforgettable gatherings? And what secrets unfolded behind those closed doors? This is a banquet you won't want to miss. The first state dinner hosted by George Washington set the stage for presidential hospitality in a brand new republic. Held during his first term, this gathering was designed to embody the values of the young nation: unity, civility, and strength, while also demonstrating that America could host as graciously as any European court. It was, in many ways, a diplomatic debut for the United States. The menu featured hearty, quintessentially American fare. Guests dined on roast meats, including beef and lamb, paired with fish dishes and seasonal vegetables. A true standout was the hoe cakes, a colonial favorite made from cornmeal, served with honey and Madeira wine. Though modest by today's standards, the spread was a thoughtful blend of simplicity and refinement, much like Washington himself. The guest list was a mix of foreign diplomats, government officials, and notable figures of the fledgling republic. It was a strategic move, allowing Washington to establish his leadership style while bringing together diverse voices under one roof, a challenging yet necessary feat for a nation in its infancy. Washington, who famously lacked a natural inclination for small talk, once joked that his dinners were less about conversation and more about filling bellies. Yet, his understated charm and attention to detail made these gatherings essential in fostering unity. John Adams faced a daunting task as the second president of the United States, keeping the fragile republic stable in a time of political division and international tension. His state dinners reflected that mission. These events were about showcasing resilience and fostering diplomacy during a contentious presidency. Think of it as Adams saying, "We may be a young country, but we can host with the best of them." The guest list featured foreign diplomats, political allies, and influential members of Congress. In short, the room was full of people Adams needed to impress, or at least keep on speaking terms. The focus was clear: maintain unity, promote diplomacy, and avoid the political gridlock that often haunted his administration. The menu leaned toward refinement with a touch of indulgence. Turtle soup, a prized delicacy of the time, opened the meal, followed by roast duck and seasonal vegetables. Dessert was an apple tart, a nod to both the simplicity and abundance of American orchards. Adams knew food was more than sustenance. It was a statement of prosperity and stability. Adams, never one to mince words, once joked that he'd rather eat alone than argue at dinner, yet he knew the power of a shared table. While his presidency had its share of turbulence, these dinners were a diplomatic success, blending civility with a touch of culinary excellence. Thomas Jefferson's state dinners were where politics met fine dining. Known for his love of French culture and cuisine, Jefferson used these events to foster diplomacy and cultural exchange, especially with his favorite ally, France. He believed a good meal could accomplish what hours of debate often could not: fostering goodwill. The guest list included French diplomats, influential political figures, and intellectuals. Jefferson, ever the Francophile, ensured the evening reflected his appreciation for French sophistication. The purpose of this clever move was to strengthen ties with France and subtly communicate that America, though young, had a refined cultural identity. The menu was quintessential Jefferson: bouilli, a French-style boiled beef with vegetables, paired with macaroni pie, a precursor to today's mac and cheese. Jefferson himself had brought a pasta machine back from France, so he didn't just serve mac and cheese, he introduced it to America. Dessert featured his personal favorite, ice cream, a rare and luxurious treat at the time, and of course fine French vines to wash it all down. Jefferson is credited with popularizing macaroni, wine, and even ice cream in the United States. Such a culinary trendsetter. For Jefferson, a state dinner was a declaration of taste, diplomacy, and, yes, a bit of indulgence. James Madison's state dinners were as much about diplomacy as they were about distraction. Elegant escapes during the turbulent War of 1812. At the heart of these events was Dolly Madison, the First Lady who practically invented the role of political hostess. While James strategized in the war room, Dolly charmed guests at the dinner table, using social gatherings to build bridges and bolster morale during a time of national uncertainty. The menu reflected both the Madison household's refined tastes and the regional influences of the time. Terrapin stew, a Maryland delicacy made with turtle, was a highlight. For a bold culinary twist, guests were treated to oyster ice cream. While it might make modern diners shudder, it was Dolly's favorite innovation. Seasonal fruits rounded out the offerings, adding a fresh, simple elegance to the table. The guest list included foreign diplomats and Washington's elite, ensuring these gatherings were not only social but politically strategic. Dolly used her charm and hospitality to maintain alliances and foster unity, ensuring that even amid war, the capital remained a hub of civility. Her influence was so profound that one guest joked she was the only First Lady who could make oysters patriotic. And frankly, she probably could. James Monroe's state dinners were nothing short of diplomatic celebrations, embodying the optimism of the era of good feelings. These gatherings were designed to underscore the principles of the Monroe Doctrine, a bold declaration that the Western Hemisphere was off-limits to European interference. The guest list included foreign dignitaries, with special attention given to representatives from newly independent Latin American nations. These dinners symbolized U.S. support for their sovereignty while asserting America's emerging leadership in the hemisphere. It was Monroe's way of saying, "Welcome to the neighborhood, just don't let Europe drop by uninvited." The menu, like the political messaging, was hearty and deliberate. Guests dined on roast beef, baked ham, lobster salad, and jelly cakes, a spread designed to highlight both American abundance and refinement. Lobster salad, in particular, offered a touch of coastal elegance, while jelly cakes, a popular dessert of the era, provided a sweet conclusion. Monroe's wife, Elizabeth, brought a touch of French sophistication to these events, thanks to her years abroad. She ensured the dinners blended old-world refinement with new-world pride. One observer noted the meals were a diplomatic banquet as much as a culinary one. In Monroe's hands, even a slice of ham could carry a message: America was here to stay. Abraham Lincoln's state dinners were a reflection of the man himself, straightforward, practical, and deeply rooted in purpose. Hosted during the harrowing years of the Civil War, these gatherings aimed to foster unity and provide a rare sense of normalcy in an otherwise fractured nation. Lincoln used the dinners as a symbol of resilience, showing that even amid national turmoil, the presidency endured and the Union still had a table big enough for everyone, at least metaphorically. The guest list included government officials, military leaders, and the occasional international visitor. These weren't lavish affairs, but purposeful ones, focused on building connections and fostering collaboration among those tasked with holding the country together. If tensions were high on the battlefield, Lincoln hoped a shared meal could, at least for an evening, encourage mutual understanding. The menu was humble but hearty, reflective of Lincoln's simpler approach to the presidency. Roast turkey and ham provided the staples, accompanied by corn pudding and apple pie for dessert, a nod to tradition and comfort. Lincoln, who famously had little interest in food himself, was more focused on the company than the cuisine. He believed these dinners were about people, not pomp. As one guest quipped, "Lincoln wasn't there to impress your palate. He was there to hear your ideas and maybe share a story or two." In that way, his dinners truly embodied the Union he sought to preserve. Ulysses S. Grant's presidency marked a turning point in state dinners, elevating them from domestic gatherings to formal diplomatic showcases. In 1874, Grant hosted the first official state dinner for a foreign head of state, King Kalakaua of Hawaii. At a time when the United States was expanding its influence in the Pacific, the dinner symbolized a burgeoning partnership with Hawaii and Grant's vision of global diplomacy. The guest list reflected the dinner's significance, including prominent government officials and, of course, King Kalakaua, the first Hawaiian monarch to visit the U.S. This event underscored the growing ties between the nations, and Grant used the occasion to highlight America's commitment to fostering international relationships. The menu was as grand as the occasion, blending American and European culinary traditions. Guests were served oysters on the half-shell, roast quail, and terrapin stew, always a favorite among 19th-century elites. For dessert, ices molded into intricate shapes of fruits and flowers added a theatrical flair to the evening. King Kalakaua, who was passionate about modernizing Hawaii, was reportedly quite taken by the evening's elegance. Meanwhile, Grant, known more for his battlefield strategy than his social graces, famously remarked that the food spoke well enough for itself. Rutherford B. Hayes may not be the most celebrated name in presidential history, but his state dinners carried a profound significance. Serving as president during the turbulent years following the Civil War, Hayes used these gatherings to promote reconciliation and unity. His administration's focus was clear: mending the nation's divisions after Reconstruction and showing that the United States could indeed move forward together. At his table, former adversaries sat shoulder to shoulder, a symbolic effort to heal the wounds of a fractured nation. The guest list reflected this mission. Prominent Northern and Southern leaders were invited, making these dinners a rare opportunity for dialogue and understanding. Hayes was serving a vision of a united America, one dinner course at a time. The menu, much like Hayes himself, was modest yet thoughtful. Roast chicken and baked fish with cream sauce provided hearty staples, while mashed potatoes offered a comforting touch. Dessert was cherry pie, a nod to American tradition and simplicity. Hayes's wife, Lucy, was the First Lady to ban alcohol from the White House, earning her the nickname Lemonade Lucy. While the dinners were dry, the conversation flowed freely. The goal wasn't extravagance, but familiarity, reminding guests of shared values and a common heritage. Theodore Roosevelt was a man of action, whether charging up San Juan Hill or shaking up Washington politics. So it's no surprise that when he hosted a state dinner in 1905 to honor Japanese diplomats, it was nothing short of groundbreaking. This was the first modern state dinner, marking a new era in U.S. diplomacy. Held to strengthen relations with Japan following the Russo-Japanese War, the event celebrated Roosevelt's role in brokering the Treaty of Portsmouth, which earned him the Nobel Peace Prize. The guest list included Japanese diplomats, led by the Japanese ambassador, and key U.S. officials. It was a carefully orchestrated evening designed to showcase mutual respect and emphasize America's commitment to fostering peace in the Pacific. Roosevelt knew diplomacy could be as much about gestures as policies, and this dinner set the stage for warmer U.S.-Japan relations. Dinner began with mock turtle soup, followed by salmon and roast beef tenderloin. For dessert, the guests were treated to baked Alaska, a showstopper designed to impress. Roosevelt, famous for his larger-than-life personality, reportedly toasted the Japanese delegation with gusto, stating his hope for perpetual friendship between our nations. William Howard Taft's presidency was a time when the U.S. was flexing its muscle in the Pacific, and his state dinners played a key role in reinforcing America's growing influence. One notable event in 1911 aimed to strengthen ties with Asian nations, particularly Japan and China, while also promoting trade. As the U.S. emerged as a global power, Taft saw these gatherings as opportunities to forge economic partnerships, and he wasn't about to let a dinner go by without putting America's best foot forward. The guest list was packed with Japanese and Chinese diplomats, along with business leaders who could help cement the U.S.'s economic dominance in the region. The dinner was a diplomatic maneuver designed to promote cooperation and open markets. The menu, an elegant blend of Asian and Western flavors, was carefully selected to impress. It started with consommé with dumplings, followed by roast pheasant, a dish of both sophistication and American tradition. Pineapple fritters brought a tropical flair to the table, while chocolate eclairs added a sweet French touch. These dishes represented the bridging of cultures. Taft, known for his size, was not one to skimp on dinner. At one dinner, he famously remarked, "A president's work is never done, especially when the food is this good." But more than satisfying appetites, these dinners were about strengthening ties that would help shape the Pacific's future. Franklin D. Roosevelt's state dinners during World War II were far from ordinary. They were pivotal moments of wartime diplomacy. In 1943, he hosted a dinner that brought together two of the most influential leaders of the Allied forces, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin. This was a strategic summit designed to solidify alliances and chart the course for victory. The menu was a comforting mix of American tradition and wartime practicality. Guests dined on roast turkey with oyster stuffing, a dish that gave a nod to American holiday feasts. Creamed onions added a rich, homey touch, while English plum pudding, a classic British dessert, bridged the gap between the Allies' different culinary traditions. And to wash it all down, Roosevelt served wine from the White House cellar. The guest list, aside from Churchill and Stalin, included other key Allied leaders, each with their own role to play in the military strategy discussions that followed the meal. The dinner was a blend of high diplomacy and camaraderie, with Roosevelt skillfully using the table as a venue for crucial talks on defeating the Axis powers. Churchill, never shy about his appetite, was said to have enjoyed the food so much he joked, "If we lose this war, at least we'll have had a good dinner." The dinner, after all, was about shaping the future of the world. After the devastation of World War II, the world needed more than just rebuilding. It needed leadership, unity, and a strong diplomatic foundation. In 1947, President Harry S. Truman hosted a pivotal state dinner to discuss these very issues, aiming to solidify America's role in post-war reconstruction and strengthen relations with Europe. Among the distinguished guests were Winston Churchill, key European leaders, and American political elites, all gathered to chart a course for the future of the Western world. The menu featured baked ham, a hearty American classic, paired with sweet potatoes, a dish that evoked a sense of home and tradition. For dessert, there was cherry pie, a quintessentially American treat, symbolizing the nation's resilience and optimism in the face of global challenges. To accompany the meal, Truman served wine and champagne, raising a glass to the hope of a prosperous, cooperative future. The dinner served as a backdrop for high-stakes discussions on the Marshall Plan and other post-war initiatives. With Europe in ruins, Truman and his guests discussed how the U.S. would lead the way in rebuilding the continent and preventing the spread of communism. Churchill, ever the wit, joked that Truman was much more hospitable than our British dinners, adding that the cherry pie was the true weapon of mass reconstruction. Sometimes even diplomacy requires a little sweetness. Dwight D. Eisenhower's presidency came at a time when the Cold War was heating up, and the world was looking to the United States to lead the charge against Soviet expansion. In 1959, Eisenhower hosted a memorable state dinner designed to strengthen transatlantic ties and build stronger alliances within NATO. The guest list was a who's who of Western leadership, including French President Charles de Gaulle and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. It was an evening of diplomacy and strategy, with the dinner table serving as a venue to solidify commitments to the West's unity against the growing threat of communism. The menu was a lavish affair, fitting for such an important gathering. Lobster bisque started the meal on an elegant note, followed by the classic main course of filet mignon, a symbol of American culinary excellence. Potato soufflé, light and fluffy, was served as a side, while cherry jubilee rounded out the evening, a dessert that was as showy as the political significance of the event. The dinner was about securing alliances in the face of an increasingly tense global stage. With the Soviet Union on the rise, Eisenhower knew the importance of a united front. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy hosted a landmark state dinner with one goal in mind: to celebrate the enduring friendship between the United States and France during the early years of the Cold War. The occasion was especially significant because it marked the first official state visit of French President Charles de Gaulle to the U.S. The dinner was a statement of cultural diplomacy, showcasing the deep ties between two nations with shared democratic values. The menu served as a tribute to French cuisine, as JFK was known for his appreciation of good food and for fostering cultural ties through it. The evening began with a rich French onion soup, followed by the main course, filet mignon with béarnaise sauce, a classic French dish that highlighted the sophistication of the French culinary tradition. Asparagus with hollandaise sauce added a refined touch, while champagne parfait offered a sweet, celebratory end to the meal. The guest list was a who's who of diplomats, with de Gaulle and other dignitaries in attendance. This dinner was a diplomatic event meant to strengthen the U.S.-France alliance at a time when both nations were seeking to navigate the tense geopolitical climate of the Cold War. Kennedy, known for his charm, reportedly remarked that the only thing more exciting than this dinner is the prospect of working together with France to build a stronger world. A meal fit for diplomacy and a toast to the power of international friendship. After the transformative events of the 1960s, Lyndon B. Johnson's presidency focused on healing the nation's divisions and celebrating progress, especially in the realm of civil rights. In 1965, LBJ hosted a state dinner that reflected the growing unity and the cultural changes in America, especially the strides being made in civil rights. The event was an opportunity to promote American values of equality and inclusivity, while also solidifying the country's leadership on the world stage. The menu was a celebration of Texas-style comfort food, a nod to Johnson's roots. Guests were treated to barbecued ribs, tender and flavorful, accompanied by cornbread, another Southern classic. Texas-style chili added a spicy kick, while pecan pie provided a sweet homegrown dessert to wrap up the evening. It was a dinner steeped in the traditions of the American South, designed to showcase the diversity of American culture. The guest list was diverse, with leaders from the civil rights movement and political elites in attendance. This was a deliberate move by LBJ, who was committed to building bridges within the country while navigating the challenges of a world still reeling from the tensions of the Cold War. Richard Nixon's 1972 state dinner marked a historic moment in U.S. diplomacy, the first official visit to China by a sitting American president. This dinner symbolized the thawing of Cold War tensions and the beginning of a new chapter in U.S.-China relations. The guest of honor, Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai, sat across from Nixon, with both leaders eager to foster a new diplomatic era. The menu was designed to honor Chinese culture while offering a taste of traditional Chinese cuisine. The dinner began with the iconic Peking duck, roasted to perfection and served with thin pancakes and hoisin sauce, a true Chinese delicacy. Shark fin soup followed a dish that has long been a symbol of Chinese fine dining. Dim sum, a beloved Chinese appetizer, rounded out the menu, offering a variety of small, flavorful bites. Nixon's guest list was a carefully chosen mix of Chinese officials and U.S. dignitaries, all part of a delicate diplomatic dance aimed at building trust between the two nations. The dinner was a clear message that the U.S. was ready to establish closer ties with China, moving beyond decades of isolation. Nixon, known for his keen understanding of symbolism, reportedly said, "If you can get the Chinese to eat dinner with you, you can talk politics." And talk they did, over a delicious historic meal that forever changed global diplomacy. Gerald Ford's presidency began under challenging circumstances, with the U.S. recovering from the turmoil of the Watergate scandal. In 1974, Ford hosted a state dinner that aimed to restore both domestic and international confidence in the U.S. administration. This dinner was as much about diplomacy and rebuilding trust as it was about the carefully chosen menu designed to impress European leaders and key U.S. political figures. The evening featured a sumptuous array of dishes, starting with beef Wellington, an elegant dish showcasing perfectly cooked beef wrapped in puff pastry, a symbol of refinement. Lobster Newburg followed, an indulgent and decadent dish popular in upscale dining circles. For dessert, Ford's guests were treated to a rich chocolate mousse, a fitting end to an evening meant to impress both the taste buds and the political world. The guest list included European leaders, notably from NATO countries, and influential U.S. political elites. The purpose of the dinner was clear. Ford wanted to assure the world that the U.S. was steady, strong, and ready to maintain its leadership role in the face of post-Watergate uncertainty. It was about rebuilding the nation's reputation and fostering stronger relationships with Europe. Jimmy Carter's presidency was defined by a commitment to human rights and global diplomacy, and one of his signature state dinners in 1977 reflected those values. This dinner, held in honor of Middle Eastern leaders and human rights advocates, was a statement of Carter's vision for the world. The meal highlighted his emphasis on global peace and social justice, especially in the Middle East. The menu was a comforting and elegant showcase of American cuisine, beginning with roast lamb, a nod to Middle Eastern culinary traditions, followed by fresh, seasonal vegetables representing Carter's commitment to environmental issues. For dessert, peach cobbler brought a touch of Southern hospitality to the table, a reminder of the president's Georgia roots. Invited guests included leaders from the Middle East, as well as key figures in the human rights movement, with Carter aiming to build bridges across cultural divides. The dinner was a chance for the president to demonstrate U.S. leadership on the world stage, focusing on human rights and encouraging peace in a region often mired in conflict. Carter's belief in diplomacy was so strong that he famously joked, "If this dinner doesn't go well, I'll have to break out the peach cobbler for a second round of peace talks." A meal served with both purpose and charm as Carter worked to use every opportunity to make the world a better place. Ronald Reagan's state dinner in 1982 was a celebration of the special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom, two nations united by shared values and Cold War concerns. Held in honor of British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, the dinner was designed to reinforce the strong ties between the two countries at a time when global tensions were high. The menu was a showcase of American grandeur, with dishes that exemplified the best of U.S. hospitality. The meal began with poached salmon, elegantly presented and accompanied by a light, flavorful sauce. The main course featured filet mignon, tender and perfectly seared, an indulgent American classic. For dessert, guests enjoyed a decadent chocolate soufflé, a sweet and sophisticated finale to the evening. The guest list was a carefully curated mix of global leaders and key political figures, with Thatcher taking center stage. The dinner was about reaffirming the strategic alliance between the U.S. and the U.K. during a time of geopolitical uncertainty, particularly in Europe. George H.W. Bush's state dinner in 1990 was a momentous occasion, held at the end of the Cold War, a historic turning point in U.S. history. The dinner celebrated not only the triumph of democracy, but also the U.S.'s leadership in bringing an end to the decades-long standoff with the Soviet Union. Hosted in honor of Mikhail Gorbachev, the dinner marked the beginning of a new era of U.S.-Russia relations. The menu was as lavish as the occasion, beginning with a delicate lobster tail, followed by a perfectly prepared filet mignon, both symbolizing the elegance and strength of the U.S. at the time. To cap off the evening, the guests were served baked Alaska, a decadent dessert that would have made any Cold War adversary melt. Gorbachev, along with European leaders, were invited to the dinner, where the focus was on celebrating democracy's victory and fostering an atmosphere of cooperation between the U.S. and the former Soviet Union. The dinner was a powerful symbol of the diplomacy that led to the peaceful end of the Cold War and the beginning of a more hopeful international landscape. Bush, with his characteristic humor, quipped that baked Alaska was the perfect dessert to represent the collapse of the Soviet Union. A little fiery on the outside but soft and warm on the inside. The dinner served as a reminder that while the world was changing, the U.S. would remain a steadfast leader. Bill Clinton's 1994 state dinner in honor of Nelson Mandela was a historic moment marking the dawn of a new era for South Africa. Following Mandela's release from prison and his country's transition to democracy, the dinner symbolized the triumph of equality and reconciliation in a nation that had once been divided by apartheid. The menu reflected Southern American cuisine, a fitting tribute to Mandela's journey and the cultural ties between the U.S. and South Africa. Guests were treated to crab cakes, a coastal delicacy, followed by collard greens, a Southern staple, and sweet potato pie for dessert. The meal was rich in both flavor and significance, connecting the hearts of Americans and South Africans alike. Invited to the dinner were Mandela and key South African leaders, along with prominent U.S. politicians, making the event a significant diplomatic gathering. The dinner was about honoring Mandela's leadership and the profound change his presidency had brought to his country. It celebrated South Africa's newfound democracy and the end of racial injustice. Clinton, known for his casual approach, joked, This is the kind of meal where you don't just talk about reconciliation, you feel it in every bite. The dinner, like Mandela himself, proved that change was not only possible but could be delicious too. George W. Bush's 2007 state dinner was an elegant affair designed to celebrate the enduring bond between the United States and the United Kingdom. Hosted in honor of Queen Elizabeth II's visit, the dinner marked a moment of reflection on the long history of shared values, friendship, and collaboration between the two nations. The menu was a refined choice of classic British-inspired dishes with a touch of American flair. Guests enjoyed Dover sole, a delicate and prized fish from the waters of the English Channel, paired with a light spring pea soup to start the meal. For dessert, a traditional British trifle offered a sweet, layered finish to the evening, with fruit, sponge cake, and custard. Queen Elizabeth II and her husband, Prince Philip, were the distinguished guests of honor, with numerous U.S. political leaders in attendance. The dinner was a tribute to the special relationship between the two countries, emphasizing the mutual respect and enduring alliance forged over decades. In keeping with royal tradition, President Bush joked that he had spent considerable time practicing his British accent in preparation for the dinner. The event was about celebrating the personal ties that have long bound the U.S. and the U.K. As Bush noted, the Queen doesn't just rule, she rules with grace. A fitting tribute to a monarch who had witnessed so much history. Barack Obama's 2009 state dinner in honor of Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was a landmark event in U.S.-India relations. Held to deepen diplomatic ties between the two nations, the dinner emphasized their shared commitment to democratic values and highlighted India as a rising global power. Obama's approach to foreign policy had a strong focus on building partnerships with emerging nations, and this dinner was a perfect reflection of that. The menu was a fusion of American and Indian flavors designed to honor both cultures. Guests enjoyed a vibrant green curry with prawns, a nod to India's rich culinary tradition, followed by a comforting lentil soup, often a staple in Indian cuisine. For dessert, a pear tart offered a subtle, sweet finish that tied the meal together. Prime Minister Singh and his delegation were joined by key international diplomats, underscoring the importance of the evening. The event also reinforced the growing cooperation between the U.S. and India on issues ranging from trade to climate change. As Obama remarked, "Tonight, we celebrate our shared values, our partnership, and the strength that comes from our democracies." Donald Trump's 2018 state dinner was a dazzling affair, showcasing the long-standing ties between the United States and France. Held in honor of French President Emmanuel Macron and his wife, Brigitte Macron, the evening was a celebration of shared history and values. The dinner also allowed Trump to strengthen personal diplomacy, fostering closer ties with one of the U.S.'s oldest allies. The menu reflected both American and French culinary traditions, featuring a rack of lamb, an elegant French classic, paired with jambalaya, offering a taste of the American South's rich flavors. Dessert was a delicate nectarine tart, balancing sweetness with sophistication. Among the invited guests were prominent American political figures, along with a strong French delegation. The dinner was a chance for both leaders to discuss key issues such as global security, trade, and the Paris Agreement. Trump and Macron had developed a strong personal rapport, and this dinner was an opportunity to reinforce that relationship. The night's event had a certain flair of its own, as Trump reportedly joked with Macron about making the French feel at home in the U.S., saying, "Don't worry, you'll be the most elegant people in the room." However, the evening was a reflection of the enduring U.S.-French relationship, one founded on shared democratic values and a strong history of cooperation. Joe Biden's first state dinner, held in December 2021, marked a pivotal moment in the post-pandemic world. The event was a clear statement of the United States' commitment to rebuilding international relationships and restoring global alliances, particularly with North American neighbors and key global leaders. The dinner was a platform for addressing climate change and affirming America's leadership on the global stage, with special attention given to environmental issues. The menu for the evening was a carefully curated blend of American comfort and fine dining. Guests enjoyed lobster, short ribs, and a decadent chocolate cake, reflecting the lavish yet welcoming tone of the gathering. The meal was an elegant reminder of America's culinary prowess and its ability to host a diverse range of international guests. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, along with other prominent global leaders, was in attendance, underscoring the importance of United States-Canada relations in the Biden administration's foreign policy. The dinner was a warm, engaging celebration of unity and collaboration on global challenges like climate change, setting the tone for Biden's foreign policy approach. While you might think Sir George Washington was a rather sophisticated man who would have hobbies like golfing and reading, he actually loved his beer just like anyone else, particularly dark porters, which were a drink he would distill and make himself in his Virginia estate near Mount Vernon. It seems Washington had a deep appreciation for porters above all else, and a chilled cup was something you would always see in his office. So when you go as far back as the first American president, George Washington, you go to a time where restaurants in the modern sense were not really that popular. What Sir Washington did have were taverns and inns, and one of his favorites was the City Tavern in Philadelphia. He was seen dining there many times, as well as the Fraunces Tavern in New York City. George Washington was known for a lot of things during his presidential run: his impact on history, his policies and changes to the laws, and his memorable campaigns. A little-known fact about the esteemed man was that he had a particular fondness for cherries and was known to snack on them frequently. Like a smoker needs a puff every 5 minutes, Washington could not go around the White House without finding an excuse to pop a cherry. George Washington deeply disliked turnips and was always found turning them away, despite his staff urging him to include some in his diet. Turnips are pretty well regarded for what they can do for your health, and you would think that fact would not be lost on one in as esteemed of a position as the president. Unfortunately, it seems the cons of the taste override the pros of the body in this case, and for all his wisdom and political expertise, Washington could not convince himself to down one. John Adams, on the other hand, was an apple cider connoisseur of sorts. He always talked about his passion for the drink at great length in his letters to friends, family, and acquaintances alike. You would think a man who could have the finest cup of wine or whiskey at the drop of a hat would have a more extravagant pick, but sometimes the simple things in life make you the happiest. John Adams was similar to the man in the chair before him, and he loved unwinding down at a tavern in Boston known as Mason's. See, Mason's was a cozy little joint that the president could drink at without any disturbances. Adams was known for his appreciation of simple New England fare, often enjoying a hearty bowl of clam chowder. John Adams, on the other hand, deeply appreciated hard cider, and it was one of the things you would most commonly see him with if you were in the vicinity. A lot of the White House staff also recalls how much of the stuff they would have to fetch because of the obsession their president had developed with it over the course of his terms. John Adams, on the other hand, never liked tea. We can kind of see that, and we would say it is not every American's cup of, well, you know how the saying goes. John Adams always preferred a classic black coffee or a glass of whiskey as his beverage of choice. The appeal of tea and toast and all the subculture surrounding it was a little lost on him. Speaking of the flashy and the grand, Thomas Jefferson could not do without his beloved Italian wines. It was known that Thomas was a fan of both red and white wines, with a slight preference for the red. He would have stocks of vintage wines from the freshest vineyards you could get in Italy, bottles that were aged as long as he had been alive. If you had the wallet of a president, would you not like to have your very own wine collection? Thomas Jefferson did not really jibe with the comforts of the simple life at the corner of a bar, but instead, he found a lot of solace in French cuisine and fine dining. The two go together as well as jam and toast do, so it is no wonder he spent a lot of time in Paris visiting restaurants like La Petite Venise and Café de Paris. Jefferson is also credited with introducing macaroni and cheese to America after discovering it on his travels in Europe. Thomas Jefferson kept it pretty plain and simple with some mac and cheese, going back to his childhood days. We are not sure how true this is, but apparently his mom used to make a pretty good mac and cheese, and the love of the dish stuck with him forevermore. Even without a nostalgic backstory, Who hasn't enjoyed a mac and cheese phase at some point? Thomas Jefferson had a pretty famously low tolerance for spicy foods. This man could handle the nation on a Tuesday at 11 a.m., but it seems a slight pepper was his worst nightmare. Everyone has their soft spots, and it seems Jefferson's were triggered rather badly with anything that had even a bit of heat packed into it. James Madison had a pretty similar appreciation for wine and champagne, though he loved to pair it up with a cold glass of whiskey too. He would often be found browsing through his many thousands of books, which was impressive even for a president, with champagne in hand. When James Madison was not busy with the lovely cooking his wife would prepare with the fresh produce of the Montpelier estate, he was reportedly busy at various inns and taverns in Philadelphia. He had no proper favorite that he would swear on over all else, but he liked sampling everything the city's various establishments had to offer whenever he could. Guess he was adventurous? James Madison's love for ice cream began when his wife, Dolly, became famously fond of three particular flavors: apricot, pink peppermint, and vanilla. As far as first ladies go, it was pretty sweet of her to keep her husband's glucose levels covered by giving him a newfound sweet tooth, no pun intended. James Madison seems to take after Jefferson's choice in palate and spice level, as he also did not like spicy food too much. Funnily enough, he was not one for seasoning either. While some presidents like Harding seemed to enjoy every opportunity to bump up the seasoning, Madison liked his food on the plainer side of things. James Monroe probably took his love for wine the farthest. A lot of people would opt for getting souvenirs or hitting up tourist spots when they find themselves in France, but a president on political visits chooses to go importing thousands of bottles of French wine instead. Looks like when there are no restraints, people's love of wine can go far beyond what you would expect. James Monroe did not really have a favorite restaurant in particular because, like Jefferson, he gained a taste for the finer delicacies of French cooking. Once you get hooked, you get onto it for life, and back in their day, most local places did not specialize in French cooking at all. James Monroe ate the same way during his stay at the White House too. James Monroe, on the other hand, dearly loved Virginia ham as a breakfast option. He would swear by some ham with toasted bread, or just a plain and simple ham sandwich. You would be surprised what a small protein-based kick can do to your day and how it can get you going. Honestly, as far as breakfast options go, there are a lot more frugal and worse-tasting ones than Virginia ham, which is still a classic to this day. John Quincy also had a deep appreciation for a very specific kind of wine, Madeira, which is a classic American favorite. It is said that the forefathers were toasting with and emptying bottles of the stuff, so it only makes sense if the sixth president pays for his patriotic recipes with a fresh bottle too. John Quincy Adams, on the other hand, was not really a fan of eating for enjoyment at all when he was at the White House. In his diary, it is never really mentioned where he liked to eat out or what he enjoyed, but apparently he thought 6 or 5 small crackers and water were a sumptuous dinner. John Quincy Adams likely had one of the healthiest lifestyles of any president. This man really knew his fruits, and he was deeply serious about them too. From mangoes to plums and grapes, he ate everything, and an assortment of fresh fruit would always be available in the White House during his presidency. In contrast, James Monroe was never a fan of seafood. One specific thing he could not stand over all others was oysters, and we cannot see where he was coming from. Everyone has their preferences, picks, and choices. But why oysters? You can do so much with them, and they have been a delight of portside towns across the nation since who knows how long. Andrew Jackson liked to keep it simple and kept it to his roots as an American. You can go all over the world and find the freshest wines, champagnes, and most exotic cocktails the planet has to offer, and if you bleed blue, red, and white, then nothing will hit as good as a glass of whiskey. A belief that Jackson carried throughout his entire presidency, as well as a fully filled flask. Despite having a French cook and a basement filled with French wine, Andrew Jackson was always found visiting the many places in Nashville where you could catch a good bite to eat. From things like chicken sandwiches to steaks, he was often at any tavern or inn with good grub. Jackson's fiery personality matched his love for hearty, simple meals, and he often ordered multiple steaks in one sitting. Andrew Jackson was pretty fond of what was known as leather breeches, which is really just an extra American way to refer to green beans with bacon. Peas, beans, and basic vegetables have always gone beautifully with any kind of protein. It is kind of one of those golden rules of the culinary world where everyone just universally agrees on something. In this case, green beans and bacon have a presidential stamp of approval behind them. Martin Van Buren was cut from the same cloth so that he could really handle his whiskey. In fact, the man had a tolerance notorious enough to earn him the nickname Blue Whiskey Van, both for his inhuman liver and his love of blue whiskey. Guess old habits are hard to kill, especially when they buzz you up in a few glasses. Martin Van Buren loved going to places with good seafood, honoring his Dutch background with a good oyster. Oysters and various other kinds of seafood were common parts of Dutch culture back then, and despite growing up in Kinderhook in New York, he still tried various parts of the cuisine. He had a great love for fine dining and grand tables. William Henry Harrison brought an old Georgia classic back to life during his run as a president when he popularized squirrel stew again. During the mid-1900s, things like this started to take a dive in popularity, but Harrison was so fond of the stew, also commonly known as Brunswick stew, that he got a trend going. John Quincy Adams never ever could tolerate mushrooms. He had them taken out of everything. His pizza, his burgers, his curry, his steak. You get the picture by now, surely. No aspect of the otherwise famous topping seemed to interest him, not the smoky and earthy flavors we have come to love, or the chewy texture. Guess they were never something that fit his idea of a good accessory to a dish. William Henry Harrison and John Adams would have probably gotten fairly well, and we even have a conversation starter for them. Do not underestimate the connections that a shared love for a drink can create between two upstanding gentlemen, especially when we are talking about hard cider. While it has gone a bit out of style these days, it seems it has a track record with presidents. William Henry Harrison was a big fan of this homely place called the Log Cabin Inn down in North Bend, Ohio. This inn happened to be one that his family came to own, which naturally became a part of his estate. Having a whole inn as a part of your property is quite the convenience after all. John Tyler loved anywhere you could find good spring chicken, woodcock, or ham and eggs. He had some pretty Virginian tastes, and that is what was trending in the state during the time he was president in the 1840s. Martin Van Buren loved fresh oysters, and in his free time would go on fishing trips to get some catches of his own. Of course, he rarely had the time for trips like that, so the staff ensured he would get the freshest oysters America could serve up. Oyster-based dishes and seafood in general were something he delighted in very frequently. John Tyler and his wine parties were a sight to see whenever you would go by the White House, and if you were lucky enough to be attending the kinds of French wines they would serve, they were immaculate. Both his wife and him seemed to share a mutual hobby for collecting and trying out different wines, and he even wrote to his daughter at one point about how much he loved the drink. James K. Polk was a pretty simple and straightforward president. He didn't spend much of his free time on exploring the cuisine of the country, though when he did eat, it was out in New Orleans where he could find Creole cooking and French delicacies. At the end of the day, though, Polk preferred steak and ham and stuck to a traditional Southern diet. James K. Polk was never really that heavy of a drinker, like some of the rest on our list. Of course, he dabbled in a few sips here and there to take the edge off like everyone else, but you would not find him plastered and properly hammered. Still, despite his moderation while he was in the White House, its cellars were always chock full of fine wine. John Tyler was our second president after James Madison with an avid sweet tooth, but his cravings extended to Indian pudding more than anything else. You could always find him finishing up a bowl after a meeting or a rally or whatever it is presidents do to pass the time from day to day. Everyone has to unwind at the end of it, and Mr. Tyler chose Indian pudding as his relaxant. Anything that was overly fancy or complicated was something Andrew Jackson was not stomaching or tolerating on his plate. In particular, he never seemed to like European cuisine. The White House was pretty renowned for serving this type of food in particular. If you ever asked him, he would much prefer simple stuff like steak and eggs. Zachary Taylor, on the other hand, probably had the healthiest history with drinking compared to any of us, presidents or not. Give the man a fresh glass of milk, and he would be ready to get up and lead the country, which we are not sure if that is a statement about the properties of milk or a craving that was only severe enough in Zachary. Zachary Taylor was more or less cut from the same cloth, direct in his leadership and even more blunt and plain with his food. Wherever he went, he had the simple tastes of a boy raised in the southern countryside. He typically had cornbread at whichever tavern he went to and loved steakhouses that were popular. However, Zachary looked good in comparison to most of us, except perhaps Millard Fillmore. The man would never be seen with a drink of any kind besides water, and he would always top himself off with a glass whenever you would see him. It kind of made sense since his skin was way too young for a man of his age. But that goes to show that you should never skimp out on your hydration. Millard Fillmore liked anywhere with good New England cuisine, and one of the places that had a good knack for it was the Willard Hotel. That place opened up during the time he was president, and it became a hub for influential people to eat and rub shoulders at. In particular, he loved places with a goof-clear soup. James Polk had a deep appreciation for his cornbread, and for a time, it was thought by most of the members of the White House that the two were as inseparable as winter and beanies. Cornbread itself was a pretty light snack, and its best trait was that it was really filling for its size, so maybe he had time efficiency in mind. Or maybe he just really loved his cornbread. Martin Van Buren lived a pro-sobriety life since he seemed to dislike alcohol pretty seriously. This is probably the most strange one on the list so far, since with how many ceremonial aspects of being a president require toasting your cup, you would think each president would grow a tolerance or acquired taste for it. Martin Van Oren never seemed to, and you could not ever place him and a bottle at the same scene. The 14th president, Franklin Pierce, had a strong affinity for all kinds of alcohol. He never had a preferred drink that would preside over the others in terms of taste, but from scotches and brandies to vodkas with no chasers, the president could certainly drink. Maybe his terms were particularly stressful, even by president standards. Franklin Pierce was also a fan of New England cuisine, especially things like fried clam. He loved visiting coastal areas like Maine and Rhode Island. Most of the presidents of the early era of the American presidency did not have many favorite places they would go to, because the restaurant industry was not half as developed. They still had areas where they frequented to get their preferences met. James Buchanan loved his whiskey and wine, but whether he could handle them as much as he consumed them remains a matter of debate. We would see him walking around, stumbling a little, just a tad bit tipsy or more, and we would also see a pretty sizable collection of wines of all kinds. You would think he would build up a tolerance, right? When James Buchanan, as not busy chewing down cabbage at the White House, he often enjoyed sauerkraut in German restaurants. And when even that bored him, he visited Pennsylvania for its famous Dutch food, though there are little references to any particular names. Buchanan was known for his bachelor lifestyle, and as the only unmarried president, he often relied on the hospitality of local inns and restaurants for his meals, giving him the title of a true foodie of his time. Zachary Taylor loved Creole cuisine from Louisiana or New Orleans, especially these irresistible little deep-fried rice fritters which had a pretty sweet aftertaste to them. His first lady and wife, Margaret McCall Smith Taylor, would often enjoy treats like this from the cuisine during their tea time, which is a pretty soft palate for an esteemed war general of the Mexican-American War of 1812. William Henry Harrison, and now this seems really redundant and ironic, which is a fact not lost on us, never ever liked luxurious or rich foods. He always claimed they were too overly complicated for their own good and did not have anything to really offer. In his eyes, they were just trying to put on a show rather than taste good. That seemed a lot like forgetting the point of what good food is supposed to be about. Abraham Lincoln was president during one of the most tumultuous times in American history, so it makes sense that he in particular worked long hours and even longer nights. What got him through it was just water, black coffee, and milk, as typical as it could get, but sometimes that is all you need to get through a tough work week. Abraham Lincoln was just like that, and he found a place to express that through Ford's Theater, which hosted performances of theater and also had meals for the visitors. Another place that he was known to visit was the Café de la Régence, which was known to be visited by high-ranking politicians at the time. Lincoln, known for his love of simple fare, once joked that a plate of plain apples and a glass of milk could keep him perfectly content at any gathering. Millard Fillmore apparently had a fondness for rejuvenating broths, which is why he always kept a bowl of hot soup nearby. Reportedly, he was seen drinking all kinds of soup, from tomato-based ones to clear soups. It is nice to see a president show some love for this otherwise neglected dish. John Tyler also agreed with Harrison's take on this aspect, but he had a healthy layer to this mindset that he applied to his eating habits pretty often. John Tyler would never tolerate overly greasy foods or rich foods for a variety of reasons. The bloating, the suffocating feeling afterwards, the digestion issues. It seems there is a lot about heavy food that Tyler could not stand. Andrew Johnson probably could have benefited from one glass less and a bit more, following in Lincoln's notes with his water intake. His speech at the president's inauguration seemed to show that despite how much he loved his whiskey and getting his drink on at parties, he was not half as good as handling his liquor. The Willard Hotel is one of the few places to host two presidents, and Ulysses S. Grant is the second person who enjoyed his stays at the hotel. Perhaps his favorite restaurant would be Delmonico's. It was a New York place that got pretty famous for its simple fare, which Grant was an avid fan of. Grant's love for Delmonico's steaks was so well known that the restaurant even named a steak after him, the Grant Steak, which was served with a side of fried oysters. Franklin Pierce adored fried clams above all else, and they sustained him through much of his presidency. In fact, you could not see the guy at lunchtimes without a plate of fried clams on his table, and he was always the first to reach out for them too. James K. Polk never seemed to like spicy food that much either. Maybe this is some kind of trend within presidents? We will definitely have to keep an eye out as we go on with the list. Do you think the cuisine they serve at the White House daily makes somebody averse to spices, or lowers their tolerance pretty significantly? Maybe it was just a thing with a select few candidates. Either way, we can add James K. Polk to the growing club of U.S. presidents that did not like it hot. Civil War generals and whiskey go together like peanut butter and bread, but Ulysses S. Grant in particular was fond of binging on some Old Crow whiskey. Most people in high-ranking political seats took to champagne more than crude brands like that, but he liked to keep it honest and to the point with his drinking. No top notes, middle notes, and fancy flavors, just plain old swill that gets you drunk. Rutherford B. Hayes was probably the biggest minimalist on the list. He was the type of person to have 1 cup of coffee as a breakfast and 1 cup of tea for lunch. Despite that, he loved angel cake, especially from Ohioan bakeries. He loved enjoying some with his wife, Lucy Webb Hayes. Abraham Lincoln kept it simple and American with some bacon strips every morning or as a casual snack to keep him energized and ready to tackle the problems of a world-leading democracy. He was a very hearty eater, and besides gingerbread cookies, you could not separate the man from his bacon. Millard Fillmore was a staunch patriot, disliking any foreign cuisine, especially French. No baguettes for this man, no croissants or fancy French dishes going the extra mile. He would always prefer sweet and simple American-style cooking compared to the delicacies of the French culinary world that the White House would have to offer. Grover Cleveland was a massive fan of all things beer. Not just the drink itself, the large beer jugs or cups you would get them in, late-night trips to the bar, drinking competitions with friends, and bar culture as a whole. We like to think that the idea of going to get a few beers has evolved from just grabbing a drink to becoming a social activity. Grover's relationship with the drink certainly testifies to that. James A. Garfield is another president on the list who also had his taste buds influenced by Ohio quite a bit. He would visit the taverns and inns that you could find at the time in California and Washington, D.C., even though he wouldn't spend much time when he did get it on every last tenet of presidential duty. Zachary Taylor, in a pretty contrasting way, could not tolerate cucumbers at all. You would think he would be okay with having one on a sandwich every now and then, but even that was beneath the man. We do not know what his beef with cucumbers was or where it started from. Maybe it happened on a bad day in his childhood where a cucumber was the straw that broke the camel's back. But what we do know is that his distaste was strong. James Buchanan, on the other hand, thought cabbage over everything was pretty rad. Fried cabbage, cabbage as a topping or as the centerpiece of the dish, he would always be eating many cabbage-based meals or just chowing down on it plain and simple. That's definitely dedication to the bit, and while we can see the appeal, Loving it to the point that you eat it as is with nothing else is a bit beyond our imagination. Maybe Rutherford B. Hayes did sneak in a drink every now and then, but under the eagle eye of his wife Lucy, it seems he was on a lemonade-only diet. She would have the drink served in the White House over alcohol and always seemed to have a bit of a distaste for it, and we guess that it grew on Mr. Hayes over time too. Despite how his eating habits led him to a spiral of health issues, Grover Cleveland was never one to cut corners when it came to enjoying the simple joys of food. He always had a fondness for steakhouses and seafood restaurants and frequented restaurant saloons during both of his terms. Chester A. Arthur loved to dabble in every kind of drink he could find. He was a pretty firm believer in variety over favoritism, and you could find a vast arsenal of whiskeys, gins, vodkas, and more in the White House when he was in charge. If you have the freedom to, why not explore? Chester A. Arthur was always known to visit fine dining establishments wherever he could. One of the most popular restaurants in his time was Delmonico's in New York City, and in Washington, D.C., he would go to places with a formal atmosphere and a haute cuisine menu. Andrew Johnson was often seen snacking on some sweet potatoes. We get it, honestly. Full of fiber, quick, easy to eat, and with a delightful aftertaste. There are a lot of nutritional pros and cons, lots of logical reasons as to why sweet potatoes should be a part of your diet, but something tells us that it was just the nostalgic taste that kept him coming back for more. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to comment below which president would you like to have a sit-down with. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this.